Jessica seemed to have it all: a perfect marriage, a successful career, and a beautiful daughter. But everything changes when she uncovers the shocking truth about her husband, Daniel, and his betrayal. As she unravels the lies, she's faced with the ultimate choice: confront the man she once loved, or walk away from the life they built. Torn between anger, heartbreak, and the need for self-discovery, Jessica finds herself on a path that will change her forever. Will she find the strength to let go? Or is there still hope for reconciliation? Watch to find out how everything unfolds. It's 2024, and we're in a bustling city. Los Angeles, to be exact. You know, the kind of place where the sun almost never stops shining, the streets are always filled with people hustling, and the palm trees are a constant reminder of the life you could have if you just knew the right people. But for Jessica Green, things weren't as glamorous as they seemed. Now, Jessica's story starts like so many others. Innocent enough, at least on the surface. She had everything: a charming husband, an adorable kid, a career she was proud of, and a house in a quiet neighborhood that she thought was going to be the perfect backdrop for her dream life. She had one of those lives you'd look at on Instagram and think, wow, she's got it all together. But what you couldn't see behind those perfect posts were the cracks that had been forming over the years. Cracks that were about to widen in a way Jessica never saw coming. Jessica was 36, still young enough to feel like she had time to chase her dreams, but old enough to realize that sometimes, dreams aren't as easy to hold on to as you might think. She worked as a freelance marketing consultant, the kind of job that allowed her to be at home when her daughter Emma needed her, but also gave her a sense of accomplishment when she closed a deal or landed a new client. But even in the career she loved, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she was stuck. She knew she was capable of more, but life had a funny way of distracting you from your own potential. And then there was Daniel, her husband. They had been together for 10 years, married for 7, and had a daughter who was the light of their lives. On the outside, their marriage looked perfect. They were the couple everyone envied, the kind that could be found at parties, laughing, sharing inside jokes, their chemistry evident to everyone in the room. But inside their home, things weren't as picture-perfect as they seemed. Daniel, at 39, was a successful real estate agent, the kind who wore tailored suits and knew how to work a room. He had a charm that could sell anything, and he did, selling multi-million-dollar homes to the city's elite. His clients loved him, and his colleagues respected him. But as successful as he was in his career, his personal life was a different story. Over the last few years, Jessica noticed him growing more distant. The late nights at work became more frequent, the excuses more elaborate. He was always busy, always working late with clients, but when he did make it home, he was checked out. It wasn't just the late nights, it was the absence of attention. No more spontaneous date nights, no more small gestures. His love had turned into routine, and for Jessica, routine wasn't enough. The tension had been building for months, but it wasn't until one quiet Sunday morning, when Jessica was sitting on the couch with her coffee, that the cracks truly became impossible to ignore. She was scrolling through her phone, catching up on emails when she saw something: a message on Daniel's phone. It wasn't the first time she had looked at his phone. She wasn't one to snoop, but she'd always had this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. This time, though, the feeling was stronger. The message was simple, but the sender's name made her stomach twist. Tess. Dinner tonight? Tess. Jessica didn't know a Tess. She racked her brain, trying to recall any woman in Daniel's life by that name, but nothing came to mind. Of course, there was a part of her that told herself it was nothing, just a colleague, a client, someone from work. But the way the message was phrased, casual, familiar, like they had plans, left a bad taste in her mouth. She put the phone down and tried to shake it off, but her mind was racing. Maybe I'm overthinking this, she thought. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. But that night, as Daniel came home later than usual, smelling like whiskey and expensive cologne, Jessica's gut told her otherwise. "So, how was your day?" she asked casually, her voice steady, but her eyes watching his every move. Same old," he replied, shrugging off his jacket. It wasn't just the fact that he was late. It wasn't even the smell of alcohol that lingered in the air. It was the fact that he hadn't kissed her when he walked in, hadn't acknowledged her presence the way he normally did. He had walked straight past her, as if she were invisible. The tension between them had become palpable, a wall that neither of them seemed willing to break. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind unable to quiet itself. Was Daniel cheating on her? Was she just being paranoid? She didn't know. What she did know was that something was off, and for the first time in years, she couldn't ignore it. The next few days were a blur of suspicion, doubt, and a growing sense of dread. Jessica tried to focus on work, on Emma, on anything that would distract her from the gnawing feeling in her stomach. But every time she looked at Daniel, she saw the distance between them. She tried to confront him once, but when she brought up Tess, Daniel had laughed it off. "It's nothing," he assured her, his tone light. "You're overreacting. She's just a colleague. We were talking about a project at work." But Jessica wasn't convinced. She knew Daniel better than that. He wasn't the type to keep things from her. At least, he hadn't been before. Things only got worse when she started noticing little things, like the way Daniel's phone would buzz in the middle of the night, and how he'd immediately reach for it, as if he was afraid she might see who it was, or how he'd start leaving his phone face down whenever they were together, a habit that never used to exist. And then, there was the dinner with Tess. Jessica decided to follow her instincts. She wasn't sure how, but she managed to find out where Tess worked one afternoon. She drove past the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to see if Tess really was who Daniel claimed her to be. What she saw, however, made her heart drop. Tess wasn't just any colleague. She was beautiful, in a way that made Jessica feel small in comparison. Tall, blonde, with an effortless charm that radiated off of her. Jessica didn't know what to do with this new information. Should she confront Daniel? Should she let it all go? Or was this the beginning of something far bigger than she was ready to face? The setting is now clear. Jessica is caught in a web of doubt and suspicion, unsure of how to move forward. She's in a marriage she thought she understood, but it's falling apart in front of her, piece by piece. The cracks are no longer just cracks, they're chasms, pulling her into an abyss of uncertainty. It's a beautiful sunny day, but for Jessica, the sun feels a little too bright, the air a little too still. Her world is unraveling, and she's just beginning to realize that the man she married, the man she thought she knew, might not be the person she thought he was. As the story unfolds, Jessica must navigate the dangerous waters of infidelity, trust, and betrayal, all while trying to protect her daughter and keep up the appearance of a perfect life. But as we all know, the truth has a way of coming out. And when it does, nothing will ever be the same. As Jessica sat on the edge of her bed, the morning light filtering through the curtains, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had built was slipping through her fingers. The phone call with Daniel had been nothing short of a confrontation, but it left her with more questions than answers. She had demanded the truth. She needed to know. And when he denied everything, his face a mask of feigned innocence, Jessica realized. Maybe he wasn't lying. But her instincts told her otherwise. The phone buzzing in the middle of the night, the constant distractions when he was at home, the lingering smell of perfume that wasn't hers. All of it added up to one thing. Daniel was hiding something. Jessica had known it for months. But now, seeing his coldness and hearing his half-hearted explanations, she couldn't pretend anymore. It was time to stop doubting herself and start taking control of the situation. If Daniel wasn't going to be honest, Jessica was going to find out the truth herself. The next week passed in a haze of tension. At home, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words. Emma, their 10-year-old daughter, seemed to sense the discord between her parents, though she never directly addressed it. She just grew quieter, more withdrawn. As Jessica looked at her daughter, she felt a pang of guilt. How could she let this happen? But at the same time, she couldn't help but feel angry. The man she had loved for so long, the man she thought she could trust, had betrayed her in ways she couldn't even begin to process. The first turning point came on a Thursday night, after Daniel had left for another meeting. The phrase was becoming all too familiar, and it felt like he was using it to avoid facing the truth. It was a typical evening. Jessica was cleaning up after dinner when her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Natalie. "Hey, I saw Daniel at that new restaurant with a woman. Is everything okay between you two?" That was all it took. Natalie had seen them, and the woman wasn't Tess. She wasn't just a work colleague or a client, she was someone else. Jessica felt her blood run cold. Natalie didn't know the woman's name, but she described her as young, stunning, and very much in Daniel's company. It was a gut punch that she couldn't ignore. Jessica's reaction to this revelation was a mixture of hurt, disbelief, and rage. How long had Daniel been seeing this woman? Was it only a one-time thing, or had it been going on for months, and who was she? Natalie offered to help, even suggesting that they could follow Daniel the next time he left the house. But Jessica wasn't sure if she was ready to confront him yet. She wasn't even sure if she was ready to face the possibility that her marriage might be over. Her heart ached, but her head was clear. She knew she needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before she made any decisions. But something about that woman, whoever she was, made Jessica's resolve harden. This was no longer just about Daniel, it was about reclaiming control over her life, about standing up for herself. The next day, Jessica found herself at a crossroads. Her mind was racing as she tried to balance the emotions swirling inside her. What if she was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation? Could she live with the uncertainty? Could she trust Daniel again? If he turned out to be innocent? Or was this the final sign that their marriage had been built on lies? One thing was certain. She wasn't going to let this slide. She couldn't. And as much as it hurt, she had to know the truth. It was on the following Saturday that Jessica decided to take matters into her own hands. The plan was simple: follow Daniel, find out where he was going, and see who he was with. It wasn't easy for her to get to this point. Every step she took felt like she was betraying herself. But she couldn't ignore the overwhelming urge to find out the truth. That evening, she told Daniel she was going to take Emma to her dance class. He barely reacted. It was the same detached response he had given her all week. She had no intention of going to the dance class, though instead, she got in her car and drove to the spot where Daniel had told her he would be. He had mentioned a late meeting at a friend's house, another excuse, but this time, she wasn't buying it. As Jessica parked her car a few blocks away from where Daniel said he would be, she felt the familiar feeling of dread settle in her stomach. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew it was important that she did. She watched as Daniel's car pulled into a parking lot, a high-end restaurant not far from their house. Jessica's heart sank as she saw him get out of the car, a woman walking beside him. It was Tess. No, it wasn't just Tess, it was a different woman altogether. And they were laughing, talking so casually, like they had known each other for years. Jessica's pulse quickened as the two entered the restaurant, and she tried to steady her breathing. What was she supposed to do now? The next few hours felt like a blur for Jessica. She sat in her car, watching, her thoughts swirling like a storm she couldn't escape. She felt so small, so insignificant, sitting there in the dark, waiting for the truth to unfold in front of her. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for. Part of her wanted Daniel to come running out, to beg for forgiveness, and tell her that it was all a misunderstanding, but that wasn't going to happen. Not now. She saw them leave the restaurant a few hours later. The woman had her hand on Daniel's arm as they walked toward his car, their laughter ringing out into the night air. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't a colleague. This wasn't a business meeting. This was something else. This was betrayal. Jessica didn't know how she managed to drive home that night. The anger, the hurt, it all crashed over her in waves, and by the time she was in bed, she could barely hold herself together. She cried silently, her heart breaking in ways she didn't think were possible. It wasn't just that Daniel had betrayed her. It was that he had lied. He had told her over and over again that everything was fine, that she was just imagining things. But the truth was undeniable now. And Jessica knew she couldn't stay in this marriage anymore. The days following that night felt like a blur. Jessica was no longer playing along with the facade of a happy marriage. She began making plans. She had her own life to build, her own dreams to chase. But it wasn't going to be easy. The ties that had bound her to Daniel for so long weren't going to break overnight. She began by taking back control. She started spending more time focusing on her career, reigniting the passion she once had for marketing. She set up meetings with potential clients, dusted off her portfolio, and began envisioning a future that didn't involve Daniel. But every time she looked at her phone, or when Emma asked about her dad, a rush of conflicting emotions hit her. She wasn't ready to confront Daniel yet. She still needed answers, but she wasn't sure how to get them without completely breaking apart the life they had built together. For now, she kept the truth to herself, waiting for the right moment to confront him. If you've been enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more. Your support really helps me create more of these engaging and emotional stories, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Now, let's see where Jessica's journey takes us next. The days after Jessica's discovery felt like a whirlwind of emotions. She had seen Daniel's betrayal with her own eyes, but nothing prepared her for what came next. She had kept the secret, though the weight of it pressed on her every moment, leaving her to feel like she was carrying an unbearable burden. The anger and pain were there, but what haunted her most was the uncertainty. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't she noticed sooner? Why had she ignored the signs? In the weeks that followed, Jessica began to withdraw even further. She still took Emma to her activities, played the role of a mother, but inside, she was unraveling. It wasn't just Daniel that she was mad at, though he was, of course, the catalyst for all of this. It was the life she had been living, the version of herself she had become. She had spent so much time being a dutiful wife, a perfect mother, that she had lost touch with who she truly was. It was time to make some changes. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had to take control. And Daniel? He didn't seem to notice the shift. The days passed, and he continued to act as if everything was fine. He came home late, his excuses still just as hollow as before, and Jessica played along. But inside, she was a storm, waiting to break. The tension between them grew with each passing day, but neither one of them spoke the words that were building in their minds. Jessica's nights were filled with restless sleep, and her days were an endless cycle of pretending Daniel had become more secretive, more distant. His phone stayed glued to his hand, his late-night meetings increased, and Jessica found herself becoming a spectator in her own life. It all came to a head one evening when Daniel came home particularly late. He was uncharacteristically quiet, avoiding eye contact, and when Jessica asked about his day, his response was short, dismissive. "I was with clients. You know how it is." But Jessica was done with the excuses. She had seen enough to know this was no longer just a professional issue. This was about them, about trust, about betrayal. "Clients, huh?" Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Daniel paused at the door, his hand frozen on the doorknob. He looked over at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," she replied, her voice steady, but full of an emotion she could no longer suppress. "I saw you, Daniel. I saw you with her." For the first time in years, Jessica felt powerful. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Daniel's face paled, and for a moment, the mask he had been wearing cracked. "You don't understand," he started, but his words trailed off, failing him. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "I understand more than you think," Jessica said, her voice gaining strength. "I understand that you've been lying to me for months. I understand that while I've been here, fighting for our family, you've been out there with her." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. His shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, Jessica saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. Guilt. But it wasn't enough to change anything. It wasn't enough to fix the damage that had already been done. "I'm not stupid, Daniel," Jessica continued, her voice now rising, fueled by the hurt and betrayal that had built up over months of pretending everything was fine. "I know about Tess, and I know she's not the only one." Daniel stepped back, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The confrontation had already started, and there was no turning back now. Jessica could feel the weight of everything she had buried deep inside of her for so long pressing down on her chest. "Please, Jess," he said, his voice pleading, "let's not do this. You don't know what you're saying." But Jessica wasn't listening anymore. She had heard enough of his empty apologies, enough of his excuses. He had betrayed her in ways she could never undo. He had taken everything from her, the trust, the love, the family they had built together. And now, there was nothing left to save. "Save it," she said, her voice cold. "I'm done, Daniel. I can't do this anymore." For the first time in years, Jessica felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there, deep and raw, but she was no longer the victim of this marriage. She had been a willing participant, yes, but now she was taking back control. She wasn't going to spend another day doubting herself, wondering if she had done something wrong. She was done second-guessing her own instincts. The woman who had stood by Daniel's side for so long, thinking he was her partner, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who knew her worth. Daniel stood there, his expression a mixture of frustration and confusion. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to fix this, but the truth was, he couldn't. The damage had already been done. No amount of pleading, no amount of apologies would erase what had happened. "Don't look at me like that," Jessica said, her voice now more resolute than ever. "You made your choice. And now so have I." As Jessica stood in front of him, her decision clear, she realized that this wasn't just about the end of her marriage, it was about reclaiming her life. Daniel wasn't the man she thought he was, and as much as it hurt, she had to let go. "Do you even love me anymore?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His gaze flickered toward the ground, avoiding her eyes. Jessica had her answer before the words even left his lips. He didn't love her. Not the way she had loved him, not the way she had devoted herself to him and their family. She had given him everything, and in return, he had thrown it all away. "I think we both know the answer to that," he finally muttered, his voice barely audible, and that was it. That was the moment Jessica knew everything she needed to know. This marriage was over. She reached for her phone, dialing Natalie's number. She needed someone to help her process all of this. As the phone rang, Jessica found herself breathing a little easier. She wasn't alone anymore. She had taken the first step toward freedom. The tone had shifted dramatically from the quiet, uncertain days before. There was a newfound strength in Jessica's voice, a confidence that had been buried for so long. It was raw, emotional, but there was a sense of finality to it. The storm inside of her had calmed, and now, the only thing left to do was move forward. As she hung up the phone with Natalie, a feeling of clarity washed over her. She wasn't just a wife anymore, she wasn't just a mother. She was someone who deserved more than this. She was someone who would rise from the ashes of this betrayal and find her own way, without relying on Daniel or anyone else. If you've been following Jessica's journey, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Your thoughts and support mean so much. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next part of the story. What do you think Jessica's next move should be? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Jessica couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this alive. The decision to confront Daniel and end their marriage felt like the first moment in a long time where she had truly taken control. But as the initial wave of empowerment started to wear off, a deeper, gnawing realization began to settle in. The reality of what was about to happen hit her like a freight train. The stakes were no longer just about her marriage. It was about her future, about Emma's future, and about facing the consequences of a decision that would change everything. It wasn't just the betrayal that cut the deepest. It was the fact that Jessica had believed for so long that their marriage was unbreakable. She had worked hard to keep it together, keeping a home, raising Emma, juggling her career, and supporting Daniel through everything. All of that had been swept away in the blink of an eye, and she was left standing in the rubble, unsure of how to rebuild her life. Daniel's absence had been palpable in the house over the next few days. He hadn't stayed at their home after the confrontation. He had gone to stay with his friend, which Jessica knew meant Tess. The absence left a silence in the house that Jessica didn't know how to fill. The quiet was a constant reminder that their life together had been a lie. It was suffocating. Emma, of course, asked where her father was. Jessica lied, told her he was just staying at a friend's house for a bit. It wasn't the truth, but at this point, the truth wasn't something she wanted to share with her daughter just yet. Every night, after Emma went to bed, Jessica found herself sitting on the couch, staring at the walls, trying to figure out what her next step would be. It felt like the whole world was moving on without her. She had to do something. She had to find a way to move forward. Meanwhile, Daniel's reaction to everything that had unfolded was a mix of confusion, shame, and defiance. For the first time in years, Jessica saw a crack in his armor. He called her a few times after the argument, trying to explain himself, but Jessica couldn't bring herself to pick up the phone. It wasn't just that she was angry, it was the fact that he hadn't once apologized for the hurt he had caused her. His explanations were hollow, each one more manipulative than the last. At first, she had been willing to listen, but now she didn't want to hear it anymore. There was no excuse that could erase the years of dishonesty. When Daniel finally returned to the house, several days after their confrontation, Jessica was ready. She had thought long and hard about this moment. She wasn't the same woman who had stood by him and quietly suffered. The Jessica, who had been afraid of losing her family, of being alone, was gone. In her place was a woman who understood her worth, who wasn't willing to settle for less than she deserved. "Where's Emma?" Daniel asked as he walked through the door, his eyes scanning the empty living room. "She's at her friend's house for the night," Jessica replied coolly. She wasn't going to show him the hurt that was still there. She couldn't afford to. "We need to talk." Daniel stiffened at her words. The tension between them was thick, almost palpable, as they stood there, facing each other for the first time in days. Jessica's emotions were raw, but she was determined to stay in control. She had made up her mind, this conversation would either end with him leaving, or with her walking away. Either way, this chapter was closing. "About what, Jessica? You've already made it clear you don't want me here," Daniel said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Then leave," she snapped back, her tone sharp and final. "But understand this, I am done. I'm done pretending like this is okay, I'm done with the lies, and I'm done with you." Daniel's face faltered. For a moment, the tough exterior cracked, and he looked vulnerable. But Jessica wasn't fooled. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. This wasn't the man who had stood by her side all those years. This was a man who had used her, betrayed her trust, and taken advantage of her love. "I didn't want it to end like this," Daniel said, his voice softer now. "I love you, Jess. I've always loved you." "You don't know what love is," Jessica shot back, her voice trembling now with the weight of everything she had been holding in. "If you really loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me, and you wouldn't have thrown everything we had away." The conversation was spiraling out of control. Jessica could feel the pressure building. She knew this was the moment where everything would change. The man standing in front of her was no longer the person she had spent years with. He wasn't the partner she had trusted. And in that moment, she realized that for all his talk of love and apologies, he had no idea what he had lost. But that didn't matter anymore. She had finally accepted the truth. She wasn't going to waste any more time on someone who didn't value her. She wasn't going to spend another second questioning herself or making excuses for him. She had been so blinded by the idea of family, of love, that she had allowed herself to be a doormat. "No more. I'm not asking you to stay. Daniel, I'm asking you to leave," Jessica said, her voice clear and unwavering. Daniel looked at her, his eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But Jessica had made up her mind. She wasn't going to beg him to stay. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her into thinking that she was the one at fault here. She had been nothing but loyal to him, and now, it was time to let go. As he stood there, silently, Jessica walked past him, heading toward the door. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, she was more afraid of staying in a marriage that no longer held any meaning. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said softly, before stepping outside. The moment Jessica stepped out of the house, she felt a sense of relief that she hadn't felt in so long. The tension, the guilt, the weight of her decisions, all of it began to fade. She wasn't free yet. She still had a long road ahead of her, but in that moment, she realized that she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. As she walked down the street, the cool evening air brushing against her skin, Jessica couldn't help but feel a sense of power. She wasn't the woman who had been betrayed. She wasn't the woman who had been too afraid to stand up for herself. She was a woman who had made a choice. And that choice was to never settle for less than she deserved. The finality of it all wasn't lost on her. She had burned bridges, but in doing so, she had forged a path to a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine until now. If you've been following Jessica's journey, be sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. This is just the beginning of her new life, and we want you to be here for every step of it. What do you think Jessica's next move should be? Let us know your thoughts. The days that followed Jessica's decision felt like a blur, each one moving with purpose, yet weighed down by an emotional gravity she hadn't expected. Her house, once a home, felt more like a shell, a reminder of everything she had been holding on to. Now, with Daniel gone, with their marriage on the verge of collapse, the silence was deafening. She had made the decision to take control of her life, but in doing so, she had left behind everything she had known. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face the fallout, but there was no turning back now. Jessica kept her focus on Emma, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She made sure Emma's schoolwork was done, attended her dance recitals, and even tried to keep the cheerfulness alive during their evening dinners. But as each day passed, the weight of her own decisions began to settle more heavily on her. She had chosen a path she wasn't sure she could walk alone. There were moments when she doubted herself, when she wondered if she'd made a mistake. But then she remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the selfishness that Daniel had shown her, and those doubts melted away. But what she couldn't escape was the constant presence of Daniel's absence, his shadow lingering in her home, even when he wasn't physically there. The space he had occupied in her life was vast, and Jessica struggled with how to fill it. She started rearranging the furniture, redecorating, as if changing the space could change her reality. As she scrolled through her phone one afternoon, an email from her lawyer caught her eye. She opened it, reading through the divorce proceedings, custody arrangements, asset division, everything that was about to unfold. The legal terms, the paperwork, it was all a cold reminder of what was happening, of the battle she was about to face. Daniel wasn't going to go down without a fight. He hadn't given up just yet. Jessica wasn't prepared for the emotional backlash that followed her decision. She had thought she would feel relieved, empowered even. But with each passing day, the reality of her choice sank deeper into her bones. It was one thing to say you were done, another to actually feel it. Daniel had started reaching out more frequently. His texts became more insistent, his calls more frequent. Each time he called, Jessica's heart would race. She wanted to pick up, hear him apologize, to hear him say he was sorry, and that they could fix everything. But every time she almost gave in, she would remember his coldness, his refusal to be honest with her. She wasn't going to be manipulated again. The phone calls became more desperate, and it was during one of these late-night calls that Daniel finally hit a nerve. He promised her that if she just gave him a chance, they could work things out. He begged her to reconsider, to not let their daughter grow up with parents who were divorced. "I love you, Jess," Daniel said, his voice raw, strained. "I know I messed up, I'm sorry, but we can fix this. We can start over." Jessica closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She felt the emotional pull, the weight of the life she had thought they would have together, but she knew better. Her gut told her this was the same old act, his lies wrapped in promises he couldn't keep. "Don't you get it?" she said, her voice shaking with the effort it took to hold herself steady. "It's too late for that. You broke me, Daniel. You broke our family. I can't come back from that." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Jessica's chest tightened as she waited for him to respond. But when he did, his words were cold, his tone a sharp contrast to the pleading from earlier. "You're being irrational," he snapped. "You're throwing everything away. And for what? Because of a few mistakes?" Jessica's blood boiled. She couldn't believe he was still trying to justify his actions, still trying to blame her for his betrayal. She had to hang up. This conversation was going nowhere. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said, ending the call before he could get another word in. Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment, but then, with resolve, she pressed the button that blocked his number. The decision to block Daniel's calls was a turning point for Jessica. It wasn't just about cutting him off, it was about reclaiming her own peace, her own space. For the first time in months, Jessica felt in control of her emotions. She wasn't at the mercy of Daniel's manipulation or apologies. She was starting to rebuild her own life. But just as she thought she was getting a grip on things, a text message came in. a message that would change everything. It was from Tess. The message was brief, only a few lines, but it was enough to make Jessica's heart race. Tess had reached out to her. The woman who had been the catalyst for all of Jessica's pain, the woman who had helped destroy her family, had finally decided to step forward. "Jessica, I know what you're going through, and I'm so sorry for what happened. I never wanted to hurt you. I just want you to know the truth. Daniel's been lying to both of us, and you deserve to know everything. I'm coming over tomorrow to explain." Jessica didn't know what to make of this. The woman who had been at the center of it all was reaching out, offering her side of the story. The very thought sent a shiver through Jessica. She had already heard Daniel's version of events, had heard his lies and his empty promises, but something in Tess's message made her pause. Could this be the truth? As Jessica prepared to meet Tess the next day, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of anger and curiosity. Part of her wanted to yell at the woman, to tell her what she thought of her and everything she had done. But another part of her, one she hadn't recognized in herself for a while, wanted to hear Tess out. What if Tess had been manipulated too? What if she was just as much of a victim in all of this as Jessica was? The day was looming large, and Jessica found herself pacing around her living room, nerves on edge. She wasn't sure what she expected when Tess showed up, but she wasn't prepared for the sight of her when she arrived. Tess was younger than Jessica, early 30s, blonde, and dressed impeccably. She seemed out of place in Jessica's home, like she was a stranger from another world. But there was something about her that made Jessica pause. Something fragile, like she was about to crumble under the weight of whatever she had come to say. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Tess said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. Jessica didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her arms crossed, watching Tess with a mixture of suspicion and wariness. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Tess continued, lowering her gaze. "But I needed you to hear the truth. Daniel has been lying to both of us. And I want to tell you everything. What really happened. How we ended up together." Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure she was ready for this conversation. She had spent so much time piecing together the fragments of the betrayal. Could this woman really give her the answers she needed? The tone had shifted dramatically. What was once a story of silent betrayal was now reaching its peak. Tension hung thick in the air as Jessica and Tess faced each other across the room. The stakes were higher than ever. This conversation would either solidify everything Jessica had believed about Daniel's betrayal, or it would shatter the last remaining pieces of her trust. Each word exchanged was a thread unraveling the tapestry of lies Daniel had woven. Jessica could feel her heart racing as Tess continued to speak, her voice trembling as though she was about to confess something monumental. Are you feeling the tension build? Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let me know what you think Jessica should do next. And if you're enjoying the twists and turns in this story, make sure you're subscribed to get the next chapter of Jessica's journey. There's so much more to come.